As numerous of you guys have been wishing for a 777 review for the 777th review, well, I tried to listen, so we will take a look at a 777, but not from Harper Wings or from JC Wings, but from a completely different company who might or might not be a potential Harper killer. With that, hello and welcome to a new episode of Review, where we today will take a closer look at a Boeing 777F of ANA Cargo. And as you can see, the box looks quite different than what we usually see here at this part of a review. And that's because this is not a Harper Wings or JC Wings model, but from F-Toys. Now, on the backside of the box, you can see there are various aircraft models. That's because you usually get these in kind of a box where you get multiple aircraft, but not all of them. So you have to buy multiple of these boxes to get the entire collection. Today we will take a look at, as I said, the Boeing 777F of ANA Cargo. Now, overall, I think it is a fairly decent box design, but one thing that I don't really like about the box is that you can't really close it once you have opened it one time, and then I also don't like that the blister inside is basically popping out all the time. But that's just part of the design philosophy. Part of the design philosophy is also the fact that you don't get the aircraft model assembled. This is kind of a snap fit, so you have to put it together yourself. So once you take out the aircraft model from the box, you, as I said, have the blister, which contains all the parts that you need. Now, one thing here I also don't really like is the fact that, of course, once you have assembled the aircraft model, you don't really have a blister or box where you can put the then assembled model into when you want to store it. And that for me is actually probably the biggest drawback of all this. Another thing you should know is, of course, also that not all the prints have already been printed to the model. You get this little piece of paper where you have some decals on, so you actually need to add some of these details that you have on the aircraft model yourself. If you want to know how this works, I have made a tutorial some time ago where you can see that in detail how this is done. I can only recommend you to watch it. I will leave a link to it in the video description below. But the assembly of the aircraft model is as easy as could be. It is basically just a snap fit model as we've seen it with other manufacturers in, granted, bigger scales, but the principle remains the same. The pieces overall seem to be fitting quite well. I did have a little bit of an issue with the horizontal stabilizers, but with a cutting knife you can remove some of the minor excess parts and then it fits perfectly well. Part of the set of the model is also a stand, which you need to assemble, but very easily done. And then you have a stand which you can use to display your aircraft model, should you wish to do so. And the stand, as I mentioned, is of course included with this aircraft model, so no need to buy it separately, as some other manufacturer believes customers should do. But now let's take a look at the fully assembled aircraft model, where I have also already added the decals. And here she is, the Boeing 777F in the current standard livery of ANA Cargo. However, there's a little addition of a sticker at the back section of the aircraft. We will look at that in just a second. So, a 777 for the 777th review. And what can this F-Toys, a Boeing 777, offer collectors? Might it be an alternative to Harper Wings or JC Wings? We will find out throughout this video. And so we start our tour around the aircraft model with a look at the tail section, where we on the vertical stabilizer have the logo and branding of ANA. We do also have some lovely detailing on the horizontal stabilizer, mostly physical detailing, but it looks really rather nice. On the fuselage, we then have the full registration code of the aircraft, the Japanese flag. That is a decal that I had to add to the aircraft model. And next to that, we then find a logo, Blue Jay. It says, honestly, I don't really know much about it, but this is, interestingly enough, then a print, so nothing you had to add as a decal yourself. Then towards the very tail we also find a printed detail in form of the APU exhaust. So far so good, but when we then look at the front of the aircraft, we can see we have the ANA Cargo branding and the cabin door. Those are the only printed details we find here. Now, we didn't have a cargo hatch in the back of the aircraft, But we also don't have one here in the front, so that's a bit strange for a cargo aircraft not to have any hatches, but that's a topic we will dive into more later in this video. But we then unfortunately also have no other details. We have no static ports, no sensors, no hatches whatsoever. The cockpit section itself, the shape around the cockpit is not the nicest one. It is okay from a distance, but when we get closer to it, it looks a bit odd. It doesn't quite look like a 777, and we also only have the cockpit windows printed on. No other details can be found here. But what about the engine nacelles? Now, they have been kept in all grey, have the silver leading edge printed on, that's nice, and any other form of detailing here is based on physical detailing, which looks alright, but also here some printed details would have been nice. When we look into the engine from the front, we can see the engine fan blades, but with a grey metallic painting, that should have been a darker tone in my opinion. But let's move on for now and take a look at the wings, which are definitely worth looking at. Overall, we can see we have a few more details here. We, for example, have the Japanese sun. That's a decal. Also on the other side, we have a little yellow marking and the registration code. Those are both decals. But also the physical detailing of the wings, I think, is quite nice. We have all the different flaps, slats and spoilers carved out very nicely on this aircraft model. Also the underside offers us a plethora of nice physical detailing. And again, the small printed details that we see here are decals that you add yourself. Now moving on to the landing gear, and sure, we have seen that much better and more refined from other manufacturers, but when it comes to the main landing gear, I think it still kind of does its job, even though it is definitely not the best I have seen. But the front landing gear for me, that is a big letdown. That is for me way too much toy-like and really drags down the model. On the belly of the aircraft, we do actually also have quite a bit of detailing, no prints, but kind of in physical detailing. We see a lot of lines here. They have been added on purpose to add a bit more detailing to it. And we do see a hole in the fuselage, but of course matching the stand that is included with this aircraft model. And we actually also have some physical antennas. That's also quite nice across the fuselage. So yeah, they are trying out things with this aircraft model, but I will come back to the physical antennas, or at least this area of the aircraft model, later in the review. Something that is a major drawback, especially on this aircraft model, given that it is a freighter, is of course that we don't have any of the cargo hatches. None of the main cargo hatches, but also none of the hatches to the lower decks of the aircraft, neither in the back nor at the front of the aircraft. But before we go into the conclusion of the model, I quickly want to go back to the top side of the fuselage, because here we do see what I would call mold line. That's a leftover from the manufacturing process. And for me, that is probably the biggest drawback on the aircraft model. It is also visible on the belly of the aircraft, actually here way more than on top of the fuselage. But this is for me really dragging down the model to be more of a toy rather than a true to scale aircraft model. If they could get rid of that, that would massively improve the model in my opinion. So there we have it, the Boeing 777F in the current standard livery of ANA Cargo from F Toys in scale 1 to 500. And what can we say about this aircraft model? Now, it is very clear that this aircraft model overall is not as refined as, for example, models from Harper Wings or JC Wings or any other die-cast manufacturer for that matter. But of course, it is also not die-cast, but a plastic model. But that actually is not a drawback for me, because you can't really see it and you can't really see that it is a lightweight. It doesn't matter that it is made out of plastic in this case. But what does matter is the overall look, and we do have some issues. Of course, the front landing gear for me especially looks not very nice. The mold line, as I said, that's a major drawback for me. I find it kind of peculiar that you do have some details that are prints and some that are as decals that you then have to add yourself. Although that is, of course, one way for them to cut down on cost and make the model cheaper. And that is the deciding factor of this model, and why I have mentioned all the things that I think are not as good as with other manufacturers. However, why I'm not really angry or mad about it, because we have to see it in the context of pricing. Now, F-Toy models are only sold in Japan, but there are of course people out there that buy a bunch of these boxes and then sell them on. So I, for example, got this aircraft model here in Europe for 10 euros. That included shipping from Japan and import charges and all that. So when you then see this model in the context of paying 10 euros for it, or if you get it from Japan, even less, then it's actually not a bad deal. Of course, I should quickly mention that if collectors want to have the full batch, yes, they might end up having to buy multiple boxes and therefore getting some aircraft multiple times, but you actually, with the decals, always get multiple registration codes. So unless you are sharing the aircraft models that you got in excess, well, you can basically build up a fleet with aircraft having various registration codes. For me, the biggest drawbacks of the model are the mold line, and especially on this aircraft model, because it is a freighter, that we don't have any cargo hatches. Now, any of the other F-toy models do also not have cargo hatches printed on or as decals, but especially with the freighter, because that's the main function of the aircraft, not having the cargo hatches, that's for me a bit strange. But okay, still, all this considered, and all the things you are getting here for 10 euros, and then compare it with the Harper Wings model, where you also have silly mistakes, but you are paying 3 times, maybe 4 times as much. And you do actually get an aircraft model of ANA, also something that Harper just seems incapable of ever delivering. So that all kind of puts things a little bit more into perspective, I believe at least. But look, I am not naive. Obviously, this is not going to be the right model for every collector, but it is an alternative if you want to have an ANA model and you just can't get your hands on it otherwise, and you probably can't get any one cheaper in scale 1 to 500. Alternatives to them are, of course, the die-cast scale 500 models of ANA that are exclusively sold in Japan, so they will be quite a bit more expensive. Or you have one custom-made, which will also be more expensive than what we see here. But yeah, I thought it was still interesting to see a other alternative to Harper Wings and what F-Toys could come up with their, given slightly different concept as to how to handle a scale 500 aircraft model. But what are your thoughts about this aircraft model? Is this for you a alternative? Would this be something that you could live with? Yes, it has some drawbacks in detailing and realism, but it is of course way cheaper. Or do you think, no, this is not the right thing for me, I would still spend quite a bit more money and then have either a custom model or try to find a scale 500 diecast model from ANA in Japan? Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this. And with that, we have reached the end of today's episode. If you have enjoyed this video, then feel free to leave a like. If you are new around here, why not hit subscribe? That would be absolutely awesome. And with that, thanks so much for watching today's video. Hope to see you soon again. I'm checking out, and bye.